She had been invisible for 3 years, serving the rich, bowing to the ruthless, and swallowing every humiliation. But tonight, in the Plaza Hotel lobby, the most dangerous man in New York saw her and decided the whole city would see her the way he saw her. A stumble, a hand to stop her, and everything changed forever. If you love stories of dignity, power, and love coming from the most unexpected places, hit like now, comment the city you're watching in so I know how far my story has come. Don't miss a second. The Plaza Hotel on a Thursday night in October smelled like old money and fresh cruelty. Claire Hughes had worked enough of these events to know the difference between perfume that cost $200 and perfume that cost $2,000. She knew it the same way she knew which guests would smile at her and which ones would look straight through her like she was made of glass, useful, transparent, and utterly replaceable. Tonight, she was replaceable. Tonight, she was also the only person holding the entire fourth-floor gala together with nothing but a clipboard, a walkie-talkie clipped to her hip, and the particular brand of controlled panic that had kept her employed for the past 3 years at Meridian Event Group. She moved through the service corridor at the edge of the grand ballroom, her black dress pants brushing the wall because the space was narrow, and because she had learned, over time, to make herself smaller, not just physically, all of it, the way she stood, the way she spoke, the way she absorbed insult like a sponge, quietly, efficiently, without wringing herself out in public. Hughes. Her earpiece crackled. That was Derek, her direct supervisor, a man who had the emotional range of a parking ticket. The centerpieces on tables 9 through 14 are wrong. Get it fixed before the Harrington table sits down. They're the correct design, she said, keeping her voice low. Mrs. Harrington approved the mock-up herself last Tuesday. She changed her mind. When? When she called me this afternoon and I forgot to tell you. Clara exhaled through her nose, one breath, two. I'll handle it. She always handled it. The grand ballroom of the plaza was lit the way the wealthy liked their sins. Warm, flattering, not too bright. Crystal chandeliers threw amber light across a room packed with New York's most photographed faces. Politicians with clean hands and dirty money. Tech founders who talked about disruption while buying fourth vacation homes. Fashion people who said things like authentic and raw while wearing shoes that cost more than Clara's monthly rent. And the socialites. God, the socialites. Women who had turned cruelty into an art form so refined it barely registered as violence anymore. Clara had dressed the room herself. She had sourced the flowers from a grower in the Hudson Valley, negotiated the catering to come in under budget without touching quality, coordinated 17 vendors, managed a staff of 32, handled a last-minute AV failure at 2 in the afternoon, and still arrived 2 hours before doors opened to walk every inch of the space with her clipboard. Nobody had thanked her. Nobody would. She ducked into the storage alcove off the east corridor where the spare florals were kept and started pulling alternatives for the Harrington tables. Her hands moved fast. She had done this before, stripped a centerpiece and rebuilt it in under 4 minutes because someone upstream forgot to communicate, and she was the one standing at the bottom holding the consequences. "Those aren't the right height," said a voice behind her. Clara turned. Vivian Ashworth stood in the doorway of the alcove wearing a dress that probably had its own security detail. She was 27 years old, the daughter of a hedge fund patriarch, and had the particular beauty that comes from never having been told no in a way that stuck. Her face was arranged in an expression Clara recognized, not quite contempt, not quite amusement. The specific look rich women deployed when they wanted to make you feel like an inconvenience without doing anything overtly rude enough to be called out on. "The floral arrangements," Vivian said. "They're too low. The photographers can't shoot over them." "These are the backups," Clara said. "I'm reconfiguring the Harrington tables. The main arrangements are the approved height." "I'm aware of what was approved. I'm telling you what we need now." Clara looked at her for exactly 1 second. "Are you on the event committee?" Vivian's smile sharpened. "Does it matter?" It didn't. That was the reality of this work. Anyone who had paid enough for a seat in this room had purchased, as far as they were concerned, the right to redirect the staff. "I'll speak with the venue coordinator," Clara said carefully, "and see what we can do." "You do that." Vivian looked her up and down once, the kind of look that started at the feet and ended somewhere around the shoulders, never quite making it to the face. Then she turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Clara stood there for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then she picked up the centerpieces and went back to work. The gala opened at 7. By 8:15, the room had hit critical mass. 260 guests, open bar, a string quartet playing something European in the corner, and the specific energy that built when people who had too much money were performing generosity for each other. The charity was something related to children in underserved communities. Clara had read the brief. She always read the brief. She moved through the room like water, invisible and essential, filling gaps before anyone noticed they existed. A spilled drink at table 6. She had the busboy there before the glass finished tipping. A guest who couldn't find his place card. She pulled the seating chart from memory and walked him to his seat. A microphone feedback shriek from the podium. She had already texted the AV tech before the second squeal landed. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. It was the one place where her particular combination of hyper-awareness and exhaustion became an asset. She saw everything, registered everything, anticipated the next failure before it fully materialized. What she was not good at, had never been good at, was navigating the other part of this job. The part where she had to exist as a body in a room that found her body unacceptable. It wasn't always overt. Sometimes it was the way a guest would speak slightly past her when she was giving information, directing their response to the male server standing 2 feet to her left. Sometimes it was the particular brand of pause that happened when she introduced herself. That half-second recalibration when someone processed that the event coordinator was not what they had pictured. Sometimes it was the comments, murmured just loud enough. They really do hire anyone these days. She had heard that one at a launch event in March. She had smiled and moved on. By 9 o'clock, the charity auction was running, and Clara had repositioned herself near the VIP section on the north end of the ballroom. This was the section she had been avoiding, if she was honest with herself, because the VIP section was where the room's particular cruelty concentrated. The tables there were populated by the evening's top donors, and at the center of that cluster was a man she had been peripherally aware of since he arrived at 7:45. Gabriel Costa. She knew the name the way everyone in New York knew it, carefully and without saying it too loudly. He was 41, reportedly, though he looked like a man who had lived 41 years with the volume turned up considerably higher than most. Dark-featured, broad-shouldered, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that the most dangerous thing in a room was often the thing that wasn't moving. He wore a black suit without a tie, which in this room was either a profound faux pas or a declaration of status so elevated that the usual rules no longer applied. Based on the way every other person at his table was orienting themselves slightly toward him, the way their body language differed even when they were the ones speaking, she suspected it was the latter. He had 3 men positioned at points around his table, none of them seated, all of them doing an unconvincing impression of being guests. She had allocated them placeholders in the seating chart because Derek had called her that morning and told her to accommodate the Costa party without asking questions. Clara had not asked questions. She was consulting her clipboard near the edge of the VIP section, running through the timeline for the live auction's closing segment, when she felt it, that particular atmospheric shift that preceded something going wrong. She had been in this business long enough to feel it before it landed, the same way you could smell rain before the clouds broke. She looked up. Vivian Ashworth was moving through the cluster of tables near the VIP section, champagne glass in hand, flanked by 2 other women whose names Clara didn't know, but whose type she recognized immediately. They were laughing about something, or performing laughter, which at these events was the same thing. Their trajectory was bringing them directly past Clara's position. Clara shifted to the left, giving them the path. It wasn't enough. She never knew afterward whether it was deliberate or whether Vivian's heels simply caught the edge of the parquet flooring at exactly the wrong moment. What she knew was that Vivian's foot connected with her ankle, sharp, precise, concentrated, and Clara's entire center of gravity dissolved. She went forward fast. The clipboard left her hand. Her heel caught nothing. There was a half-second of that specific free-fall where the body understands it cannot recover on its own and simply waits for whatever surface is about to arrive. The surface that arrived was not the floor. A hand caught her forearm. A second hand landed at her waist, and the combined grip was so immediate, so certain, that for a disoriented moment Clara thought she had grabbed a pillar. Then she was upright, or not quite upright. She was sitting, she realized, because whoever had caught her had pulled her sideways rather than forward, and she had landed sideways in a chair that was occupied. She was sitting on someone's lap. The entire VIP section had gone quiet. Claire's brain ran through about 14 responses in the space of 2 seconds before she got her footing enough to push herself upright and turn around. Gabriel Costa looked at her from a distance of approximately 8 inches. Up close, his face was harder than it had looked from across the room. Not unkind, but without any of the social softness that most people deployed in mixed company. His eyes were dark, and they were completely steady, and they were looking at her with an attention that was, quite frankly, alarming. "You all right?" he said. His voice was quiet. Not the performed quiet of a man who wanted to seem controlled. The actual quiet of a man who didn't raise his voice because he had never needed to. Yes. Clara stepped back, found the floor solid under her feet. "I apologize. You didn't do anything." He said it flatly, like a fact, and then he lifted his eyes past her. She turned to follow his gaze. Vivian was still standing where she had been, champagne glass intact, expression caught somewhere between satisfaction and the dawning awareness that something was wrong with the scene she had created. The 2 women with her had gone very still. Gabriel Costa stood up. The standing itself was something. He did it without hurry, without drama, without the sharp social energy of someone who was about to make a scene. He simply rose from his chair, and suddenly he was filling considerably more of the room than he had a moment ago. "Come here," he said. He wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at Vivian. Vivian's smile flickered. "I'm sorry?" I said, "Come here." There was a silence in the VIP section that spread outward the way silence does when everyone in a room simultaneously decides not to breathe. Vivian looked around once, registering the stillness, the attention, the way Gabriel Costa's 3 men had adjusted their positions without being asked. She walked forward. She was good at hiding fear, Clara would give her that. She crossed the floor with her shoulders back and her chin up. "I don't know what you think happened," Vivian started. "I know what happened," Gabriel said. "I watched it." Another silence. "You're going to apologize to her." Vivian's composure cracked slightly. Not all the way, but at the seam. "It was an accident. I know what an accident looks like." His voice hadn't risen at all. That was the thing that made Clara's skin tighten. He didn't need volume to make the temperature in a 10-foot radius drop several degrees. "Try again." A muscle in Vivian's jaw moved. She turned to Clara with the specific posture of someone performing contrition rather than feeling it. "I apologize," she said. Crisp. Minimal. The verbal equivalent of a check for the smallest acceptable amount. Gabriel looked at her for another moment. Then he said very quietly, "If you or anyone at your table creates a problem for her again tonight, I will personally call your father tomorrow morning and explain to him why his daughter's face is on the front page of every paper in this city. Not for anything good." Vivian went white under her bronzer. She turned and walked back to her table. Her 2 companions found things to look at on opposite sides of the room. Gabriel turned back to Clara. She was standing with her hands at her sides, her clipboard retrieved from the floor by one of his men. She hadn't even seen that happen. And she was aware that her pulse had not returned to a normal rate, and probably wouldn't for some time. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, like she had stated a fact. "You're the coordinator?" "Yes." "You've done this event before." It wasn't quite a question. 2 years running, she said. "You do good work." She didn't know what to say to that. People said a version of it sometimes, but usually in the specific tone of someone giving a tip, a gesture of magnanimity toward someone they expected to be grateful. He said it the way he said everything else, like information. "I need to get back to the timeline," she said. "Of course." She walked back toward the east corridor on legs that were steadier than they had any right to be. Behind her, the VIP section resumed its ambient noise, the particular murmur of $200 of wine and very careful conversation. She didn't look back. She should not look back. She looked back. Gabriel Costa was watching her go, not with the leering attention she had braced herself for, with something more measured than that, and somehow more unnerving. She turned around and kept walking. Derek found her 20 minutes later. He came around the corner of the service corridor looking like a man who had been handed something unpleasant and was working up to throwing it at someone else. He was 43, perpetually underdressed in professional contexts, and had the haircut of a man who got his haircut at a place with a television. Clara had worked for him for 3 years, and in that time, he had learned to exploit her competence while taking credit for it, which was its own particular skill. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I'm in the middle of closing out the live auction timing," she said. "Can it wait 20 minutes?" "It can't." She stopped, looked at him. Whatever he was about to say, his face said he had been waiting to say it for longer than tonight. "We're letting you go," Derek said. Clara heard the words. She processed them. She ran them through the part of her brain that handled operational data, and the results came back irregular, so she ran them again. "Excuse me?" Effective immediately. He wasn't looking at her directly. He was looking at a point slightly past her left ear, which was the posture of a man delivering bad news he didn't want accountability for. "There's been a complaint. From a donor. The Vivian Ashworth situation. She tripped me deliberately in front of the VIP section. That's not the complaint on file." "Then what is?" "That you created a scene." He finally looked at her. There was something in his expression she couldn't parse immediately, something tight and pressured that wasn't entirely about this. "That you instigated an altercation in the VIP section that embarrassed one of our key donors." Clara stared at him. "I was falling." "I understand that, but a man caught me. I didn't instigate anything. I was managing the timeline for the auction close, and I was tripped." "Clara." He said her name with the weariness of someone who had made a decision and did not want to debate it. "The event company has a relationship with the Ashworth family. It predates you by 12 years. I am sorry, but the math here is not complicated." The math was not complicated. She was the variable that could be removed. 3 years of building the best events this company produced, and she was the variable. "Tonight?" she said. "You're doing this tonight? During the event?" "The event is 90% complete. Martina can close out." Martina could not close out. Martina didn't know the vendor contact for the overnight equipment pickup, or the secondary mic setup for the post-auction speaker, or the specific preference of the hotel's overnight manager about how the service corridors were left. But none of that was relevant anymore, apparently. "I'll need to collect your badge and the event kit at the end of the evening," Derek said. "You'll be paid through the end of the month." He turned and walked back toward the main corridor. Clara stood in the service corridor behind the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel and did not make a sound. She pressed the heel of her hand against the wall, felt the plaster cool through her palm, and breathed. 1 breath. 2. The third one shook slightly on the exhale, and she hated herself for it. 3 years. Every piece of this room existed because of decisions she had made, relationships she had built, hours she had put in that nobody tallied because the work was supposed to be invisible. That was the agreement, wasn't it? You did the work and you stayed invisible, and everyone else got to stand in the room you built and feel good about themselves. She pushed off the wall and went to close out the auction. She was at the coat check near the plaza's east exit at 11:45, waiting for the last of the vendor confirmations to come through on her phone, when she became aware that someone was standing nearby. Not a guest. The posture was wrong for a guest. Too still, facing slightly toward her rather than toward the door. She looked up. One of Gabriel Costa's men. She recognized him from the VIP section, the one on the left, closer to the window. He was perhaps 30, with the particular blankness of someone trained to convey nothing. "Mr. Costa would like a word," he said. Clara looked at her phone, looked at the man. "It's nearly midnight." "He's aware." She almost said no. She was tired, and she'd just been fired, and the evening had left marks on her that she would feel for days. And the absolute last thing she needed was a complication that fell under the general heading of Gabriel Costa. She followed him anyway. They went through a side corridor she hadn't used during the event. Not a service corridor, but not the main thoroughfare either. one of the plaza's quieter passages, lined with low lighting and the kind of silence that cost money to maintain. He stopped at a door, knocked twice, and opened it. The room was a small library off the main hall, the kind of space old hotels kept for no reason anyone could articulate, furnished with leather chairs and books that had never been read. Gabriel Costa was standing near the window with a glass of something dark, looking out at Fifth Avenue. He turned when she came in. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly. "I'd rather stand. It's late and You were just fired." She went quiet. "By Derek Marsh, at approximately 10:45, in the East Service Corridor." He said it without particular emphasis, stating data. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know what happens in rooms I'm in." He set down the glass. "Sit down, Ms. Hughes." She sat. He pulled the chair opposite, turned it so it faced her rather than the desk, and sat. He had the posture of a man who found most furniture slightly beneath him, but was willing to make do. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to hear it before you make any decisions tonight, because the decisions you make in the next 24 hours are going to matter." "That sounds ominous." "It is. A little." Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, the shadow of one. Meridian Event Group is under investigation by the FBI. Clara heard that the same way she'd heard the firing, briquet, with a delay, like the words arrived before the meaning caught up. "They've been laundering money," he continued, "through a company called Belcourt Hospitality, which is a shell operation run by a family called Falcone. The FBI is going to execute search warrants on Meridian's offices within the next 72 hours. Every employee with signatory authority or financial access is going to be looked at." "I'm an event coordinator," she said. "I don't have signatory authority." "Not on paper, but you've been managing vendor payments and vendor contracts for 3 years. You signed off on 18 vendor invoices in the past quarter alone." He waited. Derek Marsh was about to be arrested and was looking for someone to hand off the operational paperwork to. He was going to offer you a promotion next week, logistics director. You would have had your name on every financial document that came through that office. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the air in the room. "He was setting me up," she said. "He was making you useful as a buffer." Gabriel's voice stayed level. "Getting you fired tonight kept you clean. Your name stays off the list of persons of interest." She sat with that for a moment. "You got me fired," she said slowly. "I put pressure on the Ashworth situation in a way that gave Derek a clean reason to act." "Yes." He didn't look apologetic. "It was the cleanest option. You could have just told me. I didn't know you well enough to know how you'd handle it." He looked at her with that same direct attention she'd felt across the ballroom floor. People handle things differently when they know what's coming. Sometimes they handle it in ways that draw attention. She thought about that. It was brutally pragmatic. She was not entirely certain it was wrong. "So what do you want from me?" she said. "You didn't have me brought here at midnight to tell me I'm cleared." "No," he said. "I brought you here because I have a job offer." She waited. "I recently acquired a property, the Beaumont Hotel on Park Avenue. It's been closed for renovation for 18 months. It opens in 4 months." He leaned forward slightly. "I need a director of events and guest experience, someone who knows how to build something from the floor up and make it look like it was always supposed to be that way." Clara looked at him. "Why me?" "Because I've watched you work 6 events in the past 8 months. 3 of them were in this building. 2 were at the Meridian Loft Spaces downtown. 1 was a private function in the Hamptons." He said it without any apparent self-consciousness about having tracked this. "You are the best event coordinator in New York, possibly the best I've seen. You watched 6 events. I noticed things." "You noticed me." Something shifted in his face, still contained, still controlled, but different in a way she couldn't name. He said. The word landed in the quiet room, and neither of them picked it up immediately. "The Beaumont position," she said, pulling the conversation back toward something operational. "What does it involve?" "Complete authority over the guest experience division, staff hiring, event programming, vendor relationships, aesthetic direction in your lane. Salary commensurate with that authority. He named a number. Claire's expression did not change, which took effort, because the number was twice what she had been making. I would report to you directly, she said. Yes. What happens when we disagree? We discuss it. A pause. I don't hire people to agree with me. She looked at this man across the leather chair in the low light of a library that had never been used, and she thought about 3 years of invisible work and a clipboard on the floor of the grand ballroom, and Derek Marsh's eyes not quite meeting hers while he threw her to the wolves with a 2 weeks' pay consolation prize. She thought about the number he'd said. She thought about his hand catching her forearm in the half-second before the floor arrived. I'll want it in writing, she said. The terms, before I give you an answer. I'll have it to you by Monday. I'll give you an answer by Wednesday. He nodded. Once, like a contract being countersigned. She stood, and he stood at the same time. Not the performative chivalry of a man who had been taught to stand when women entered and exited rooms, but the automatic response of someone whose body didn't know how to stay seated when negotiations were concluding. One more thing, she said. Yes. You said this is about the Falcone family. She watched his face. Whoever they are, they're going to notice when their money laundering operation gets shut down. They're going to look for the next line of business. She waited. Is the Beaumont one of those lines? Gabriel Costa looked at her for a long moment. It used to be, he said. It isn't anymore. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she said, Good night, Mr. Costa, and walked out the door. The corridor was empty and cool. She walked through it with her shoulders back and her pace even, and her clipboard tucked under her arm, and she didn't let herself feel anything about the past 4 hours until she was in the elevator, alone, and the doors had closed. Then she leaned against the wall, tipped her head back, and breathed out slowly. The number he'd said. The Beaumont Hotel. His voice. You're the best event coordinator in New York. And underneath all of it, quieter and more dangerous. The way he had said yes when she asked if he had noticed her. Not the yes of a man explaining himself. The yes of a man who had already made a decision and was simply acknowledging it out loud. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Clara Hughes walked out of the Plaza Hotel into the October air of Fifth Avenue and did not permit herself to consider what she might be walking toward. Not yet. She would consider it by Wednesday. Monday came in cold and gray, the kind of October morning that made New York feel like a city that had decided to stop pretending it liked you. Clara was at her kitchen table at 6:45 with coffee she hadn't tasted and a legal document she had read 4 times. The envelope had arrived by courier at 8 the previous evening. No return address, just the Beaumont Hotel's embossed letterhead on cream-colored paper that probably cost $3 a sheet. The contract inside was 11 pages. She had read it once fast and then 3 times slowly, which was not how she usually approached documents, but which felt necessary given the circumstances. The terms were exactly what Gabriel Costa had said they would be. Salary, title, scope of authority. All of it there, precise and unambiguous. No hidden clauses that she could find, and she had looked for hidden clauses the way you looked for a gas leak, carefully, without a light. She had a call with her friend Patrice at 7. You're insane, Patrice said before Clara had finished explaining. I haven't said yes yet. You called me at 7 in the morning about a job offer. You've already said yes in your head. Patrice was a paralegal at a midtown firm and had the specific energy of someone who had seen too many contracts go sideways. Clara, Gabriel Costa. I know. Do you, though? Because I feel like you know the name and you're doing this thing you do where you focus on the operational details so you don't have to think about the larger picture. The larger picture is that I need a job and this is a good one. The larger picture, Patrice said, is that the man is... Clara, I don't even know how to say this without sounding like a bad movie. He runs half of Lower Manhattan. He owns hotels and real estate. He owns hotels and real estate the way certain people own import-export businesses. Clara drank her coffee. It had gone cold. The contract is clean. A contract from Gabriel Costa being clean doesn't mean what it would mean coming from someone else. What does it mean coming from him? A pause on the line. It means he's careful, Patrice said, which is either reassuring or terrifying, depending on what you need it to be. Clara looked at the document on her kitchen table, at the number at the top of page 4. "I'll call you Wednesday," she said. She called Gabriel Costa's office Tuesday afternoon and left a message with someone who answered the phone with the word yes instead of a greeting, which she found interesting. Wednesday morning, her phone rang at 8 sharp. "Ms. Hughes?" "Mr. Costa." She had her notes in front of her. 3 pages. "I have questions." "I assumed you would." The scope of authority clause on page 7. It says I have final decision on all vendor contracts under $200,000. Above that threshold, it requires your approval. Correct. I want that threshold raised to $350. A half-second pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. Done. The staffing clause specifies I can hire up to director level without approval. I want that extended to VP of guest experience. Also done. She looked at her notes. You're agreeing very quickly. You're asking for things that are reasonable. I have one more. Go ahead. I want a 90-day performance review with defined metrics that I set, not metrics that come from your office. If I'm going to be accountable for results, I need to be the one defining what success looks like in my department. This pause was longer. I'll agree to that, he said, with the condition that we define them together, not unilaterally. She considered that. It was fair, more than fair, actually. All right, then we have an agreement. We have an agreement, she said. I'll start the first Monday of November. I'll have the amended contract sent today. She was about to hang up when he said, one more thing. Yes. You'll be working closely with my operations director, Marcus Webb. He's been with the Beaumont project from the start. He is, a pause, deliberate, particular about process. Meaning he won't be happy about me. Meaning he had someone else in mind for the role. Who? His cousin. Clara absorbed that. That's going to be a problem. It's going to be managed, Gabriel said. I wanted you to know going in. She appreciated that. She didn't say so. I'll handle Marcus Webb, she said. She could hear something in the silence that followed. Not quite approval, but something adjacent to it. I don't doubt it, he said, and hung up. What? The Beaumont Hotel occupied a limestone building on Park Avenue that had been constructed in 1927 and renovated into mediocrity sometime in the 1980s, and then allowed to decline gracefully through the 90s and into the new century until Gabriel Costa's company had purchased it 18 months ago and begun the slow process of returning it to what it might have been. Clara walked through it for the first time on a Thursday in early November, 4 days before her official start date, because she needed to see the space before she could begin thinking about it properly. She had asked for a walkthrough and been given a key card and a floor plan and sent in alone, which she suspected was a test of some kind, though she couldn't be certain. The lobby was unfinished, scaffolding along the east wall, marble floors covered in protective paper. The bones of the place were extraordinary. High ceilings, arched windows, the kind of architectural confidence that buildings didn't have anymore because they cost too much to construct and nobody was building for posterity. She walked through the lobby slowly, touching walls, counting sight lines from the entrance, thinking about flow and light and the particular problem of making a large space feel inhabited without making it feel crowded. She was on the mezzanine level, looking down at the lobby through the restored iron railings, when she heard footsteps behind her. The man who came up the stairs was perhaps 35, lean in the way of someone who ran compulsively, with close-cropped hair and the expression of a person who had been told news they objected to and had not yet finished objecting. You're the new events director, he said. Clara Hughes. She extended her hand. He shook it. Brief, firm, communicating nothing. Marcus Webb. I know, she said. Mr. Costa mentioned you. Did he? It wasn't a question. His eyes moved across her in the same fraction of a second that Vivian Ashworth's had, though the content was different. Not the social sizing up of someone evaluating status, but the professional assessment of someone evaluating threat. I've been running the operational timeline for this project for 14 months. I know that too, Claire said. I read the project files this week. Costa gave you the project files. I asked for them. Marcus looked at her steadily. The events and guest experience role was designed to sit within the operational structure, reporting through me. The contract I signed has me reporting directly to Mr. Costa. Something moved behind his eyes. He had known this, she could tell he'd known it, but hearing her say it with that particular matter-of-factness was a different experience than reading it on paper. I want to be clear about something, Marcus said. I've had the same 3 vendors locked in for the opening event. Catering, florals, AV, we're 4 months out. The relationships are established. I'll need to review the vendor contracts. They're done. I'm sure they are, she said. I'd still like to review them. Why? Because it's my job. She said it without heat, looking at him the way she had learned to look at people who were waiting for her to flinch. I'm not here to undo your work, Marcus. I'm here to do mine. Those 2 things can coexist. He looked at her for another moment, then looked out at the lobby below. The mezzanine's going to be the main event space for private dining. We've got the layout planned. Can I see it? It's on the floor plan. I'd rather see it with you walking me through it. Something shifted in his posture, not softening, not exactly, but recalibrating. She had asked him rather than told him, and the distinction apparently registered. He walked her through the mezzanine layout, the planned configuration of the private dining space, the service access points, and the sight lines from the main seating area. He knew the space well. He talked about it with the specific fluency of someone who had spent a lot of nights in an empty building thinking through problems. He was good. She noted that without letting it show. She also noted, going through the vendor contracts he finally sent her that evening, that the AV company he had locked in was billing at a rate approximately 30% above market, and the principal of that company was a man named Terry Volpe, whose LinkedIn page listed Marcus Webb as a former colleague. She noted it. She did not act on it immediately. The first 3 weeks at the Beaumont were the kind of weeks that revealed the true character of everyone involved, because renovation timelines always did. Delays became blame, and blame became territory, and territory became the thing that people protected more fiercely than anything else. Clara was at her desk, a temporary desk in a construction site office off the lobby, by 7 each morning. She left after 8 most evenings. She learned the building the way she had always learned spaces, by being in them at different times of day, in different light, with different states of noise and silence, until she understood how they breathed. She met with the contractors. She reviewed the renovation plans against her vision for the guest experience and flagged 7 items that needed adjustment, not structural, but detail-oriented. The placement of the coat check relative to the entrance, the lighting temperature in the restaurant corridor, the size of the guest elevator indicators, which were beautiful but not legible at a glance. The contractors took her notes with the specific wariness of people who had learned to triage feedback based on who was going to be there when it mattered. Clara was going to be there. They adjusted. Marcus watched all of this from the operational side and said very little, which she respected more than constant commentary would have been, and which she was also careful not to mistake for acceptance. The AV vendor situation came to a head in the 3rd week. She had put together a vendor analysis, not just AV, but all 3 of the locked-in vendors, and scheduled a meeting with Marcus to go through it. She had sent the analysis the day before so he would have time to read it. This was not an ambush. She didn't do ambushes. He came to the meeting having read it. She could tell from the way he walked in, that particular charged stillness of someone who has been sitting with information they didn't want to receive. Before you start, he said, sitting down across from her, I want you to understand that those vendor relationships were built on project continuity. They've been here for 14 months. Switching out providers 3 months before opening introduces risk. The AV company is billing 30% over market, Clara said. That's $250,000 over the course of the contract. They know the building. They've done 2 walkthroughs. The building isn't complicated. She slid the analysis across the desk. I've identified 2 alternative AV vendors. Both have done work in comparable properties. Both can be onboarded in 3 weeks. Either one saves us between $210 and $240 on the contract. Marcus looked at the paper, not at her. Terry Volpe is a contact of yours, she said. Not as an accusation, as a fact on the table. The silence lasted long enough to mean something. We worked together 8 years ago, Marcus said. I know. She waited. I'm not saying there's anything improper here. I'm saying we have a procurement gap and I'd like to close it. You're saying it in a way that leaves that interpretation available. I'm saying it in a way that's factually accurate. She kept her voice level. You can take the vendor analysis to Mr. Costa if you want a second opinion on the recommendation. Marcus looked up from the paper. Are you threatening to go over my head? I'm telling you the process available to both of us if we disagree. She looked at him. I'm not your enemy, Marcus. I'm trying to do the job correctly. He sat back, the posture of a man doing math. I'll let Volpe know we're going in a different direction, he said. Thank you. He stood up, took the analysis. At the door he stopped, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something real, something underneath the territory dispute, something about the 14 months and the cousin and whatever it meant to have built this project, and then watch someone walk in and change it. But he didn't. He walked out. She sat alone in the construction site office and let the tension of the past 45 minutes move through her and out. Then she picked up her phone. Gabriel Costa had texted, "How's the building?" She typed back, "Ask me in 4 months." 3 dots appeared, then, "Fair." She put the phone down. She didn't examine why a 2-letter text from him felt like something she needed to put down carefully. The Falcone situation arrived the way bad things usually did. Not all at once, but in small signals that were easy to rationalize individually and impossible to ignore in aggregate. The first signal was a phone call in the 4th week. A man who introduced himself as a representative of Falcone Property Management expressed interest in booking the Beaumont's mezzanine for a private event in January. His voice had the particular smoothness of someone who had been told to be charming and had taken the assignment seriously. Clara said she would send over the inquiry form. He said he preferred to discuss terms directly. She said the inquiry form was the process. He said he understood, and that perhaps someone at a higher level of the organization would be more flexible. I'm the director of events and guest experience, she said. I am the higher level. A pause. I see. Then, pleasantly, we'll be in touch. She forwarded the call log to Gabriel's office without comment. The second signal came from Marcus. He found her in the lobby on a Tuesday morning, which was unusual because he typically communicated via email and the door of the operations office, and said, with the specific neutrality of someone being careful about tone, "The Falcone Group reached out to me too." When? Yesterday. About the mezzanine booking. Not specifically. He crossed his arms. Not combatively, almost protectively. They offered a consulting arrangement, operational partnership for the opening phase. Clara looked at him. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. He held her gaze. I wanted to tell you first. That was something. More than she had expected, actually. Thank you, she said. Don't take the meeting, and tell me if they contact you again. What is this? He said. Between Costa and the Falcones. I don't know the full picture. But you know enough. I know enough to know that the Beaumont staying clean is the job, she said. Yours and mine both. He nodded slowly. Whatever had been calculating behind his eyes finished calculating. All right, he said. That evening, Gabriel's car was parked outside the Beaumont at 7:40 when she came out. The car was a black sedan, unmarked, the kind of car that looked like nothing and cost more than most people's apartments. The window came down. Get in, Gabriel said. She got in. He didn't speak until they were moving. His driver was a wall of silence in the front seat. The city moved past the windows in its particular nighttime mode, lit and restless and indifferent. The Falcone contact, he said, both times. They're testing the perimeter. He said it without particular urgency, like he was describing weather. Falcone has been running clean money through hospitality for 4 years. Meridian was one operation. They have 3 others in the city. The Beaumont represents a gap they want to fill. Through me? Through the business. You, Marcus, anyone they can find an angle on. He looked at her. Has Marcus been approached? He told me this afternoon. He turned it down. Something in Gabriel's expression shifted slightly. Interesting. You didn't trust him? I didn't know yet whether to trust him. He was looking at the window. Now I have more information. Clara sat with that for a moment. Are you building a case against them? I'm building a hotel, he said. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. She turned in her seat to face him more directly. Mr. Costa, Gabriel. The name felt different out loud than it had in her head, and something about that annoyed her. If the Beaumont is going to be targeted because of whatever is happening between you and the Falcone family, I need to know that. Because I have 26 people I'm going to be responsible for when this hotel opens, and I don't manage risks I can't see. He turned from the window and looked at her. Full attention, the kind he had given her in the Plaza Library, the kind that made her feel simultaneously seen and exposed. The Falcones lost their primary laundering operation when the FBI moved on Meridian, he said. That loss cost them approximately $3 million a month in clean liquidity. They're going to try to replace it. I intend to make every replacement option unavailable to them by acquiring properties they wanted, among other things. And the Beaumont is one of those properties. The Beaumont is one of those properties. She looked at him. You could have told me this when you offered me the job. You would have said no. The honesty of it was disarming in a way she hadn't prepared for. She had expected deflection. He had given her the truth as flatly as he gave her everything else. Would you have been wrong? He asked. She considered it honestly. At the kitchen table with the contract in front of her, knowing what she knew now, would she have signed it? I don't know, she said. That's why I waited. The car stopped. She looked up and realized they were in front of her building, which she had not given the driver as a destination. Good night, Miss Hughes, Gabriel said. She opened the door, then she stopped. Clara? She said, without turning around. A beat. What? My name. You can use it. She got out. Good night. She walked into her building without looking back and carefully did not examine, the specific quality of the silence she left behind her. The month of December moved the Beaumont from a construction project into something that was beginning to look like a hotel. The scaffolding came down in the lobby, the marble was uncovered, and it was extraordinary, deep cream with gray veining, exactly what the building deserved. Clara oversaw the installation of the front desk millwork and spent 2 days arguing with the lighting designer about the temperature of the ambient fixtures in the lobby, until he conceded she was right, and she conceded he was right about the sconces, and they arrived at something that neither of them had planned, but that was better than what either of them had proposed. Staff hiring was underway. She had interviewed 31 candidates for 12 positions in the first 2 weeks of December. She was looking for a specific thing that was difficult to name in a job posting, but that she recognized immediately when she saw it, a particular combination of attention and warmth that couldn't be trained into someone who didn't already have it. On a Wednesday evening in the second week of December, she was reviewing final candidates for the head of guest relations when her office door opened without a knock. She looked up. The man in the doorway was not someone she recognized. He was perhaps 50, thick through the chest, with the carefully maintained look of someone who expected to be taken seriously on sight. His suit was expensive. His eyes were not warm. Ms. Hughes, he said. She did not stand up. The building is closed to visitors. Who let you in? I let myself in. He stepped into the office. One of his hands was in his jacket pocket. The other was at his side. My name is Dominic Falcone. The name landed with the specific weight of things you have been warned about before you fully understood the warning. She kept her voice level. This is private property. Everything interesting is. He looked around the office with the casual curiosity of someone taking inventory. His eyes landed on the floor plans on her wall, the vendor schedules, the opening timeline. Nice place, coming along well. I'm going to need you to leave. In a minute. He looked back at her. I want to have a conversation, professional to professional. We don't need to make it complicated. Mr. Falcone. Dominic. Mr. Falcone. She kept her hands on the desk, visible, not moving. Whatever you came here to propose, the answer is no. Whatever conversation you want to have, I'm not the person to have it with. You're exactly the person. He moved closer to the desk, not all the way, but enough to cross from the doorway into the room in a way that changed the geometry. You're running the guest experience operation. You have vendor relationships. You have event bookings. He looked at her. You have Gabriel Costa's trust. This meeting is over. Not yet. He pulled out the chair across from her desk and sat down without being invited, the way men did when they wanted to demonstrate that they didn't need to be invited. You don't understand what you've walked into here, Ms. Hughes. You're a good event coordinator. You run a clean operation. That's not what this hotel is going to be used for. He leaned forward slightly. Costa acquired this property because it solves a problem for him. A financial problem. A structural problem. You're going to be the person whose name is on the books when that becomes public. The same cold she had felt in the service corridor the night she was fired moved through her now. That's not what the Beaumont... He let you believe it isn't. Falcone's voice was patient. He's good at that, letting people believe the version that keeps them useful. He looked at her with something that was not quite sympathy but was performing it. I'm not your enemy. I'm giving you information. You broke into my office to give me information. I walked in. A small adjustment of his shoulders. The point stands. Clara looked at this man across her desk. She thought about the vendor contracts and the FBI raid and the car outside her building and Gabriel's voice in the plaza library. I didn't know you well enough to know how you'd handle it. She thought about the fact that she did not actually know, with certainty, what the Beaumont was being used for. She thought about 26 people she had hired or was in the process of hiring. Get out of my office, she said. Something moved in Falcone's expression. Not anger, not yet, but the precursor to it. The recalibration of a man who had expected a different response. He stood slowly. Think carefully, he said, about what you're building here and who you're building it for. I'll walk you out, she said. I know the way. At the door he stopped, and his hand was still in his jacket pocket, and he said without turning around, You're a smart woman, Ms. Hughes, smart enough to know that when men like Costa and men like me start moving pieces, the people standing between us don't usually come out clean. He walked out. She heard his footsteps on the lobby marble, unhurried, and then the sound of the front door. She sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Gabriel Costa. He answered on the second ring. Dominic Falcone was just in my office, she said. The silence on the other end lasted exactly long enough to tell her something. Are you all right? I'm fine. Her voice was steady. She would examine the rest of it later. He walked in, unescorted. He sat down. He told me the Beaumont is being used for something I haven't been told about. She paused. He told me I'm going to end up with my name on the wrong paperwork. Clara, is he right? The silence was longer this time, long enough that she pressed the phone harder against her ear and felt her pulse in her fingertips. Come to my office, Gabriel said. Tonight. I want an answer first. Some answers need to be given in person. Gabriel. Her voice didn't shake. She was very proud of it for not shaking. Is the Beaumont clean or isn't it? Another silence. Then, it is clean, and I can prove that to you. Tonight, she said. Tonight, he said. I'm sending a car. She hung up. She sat in her office in the partially finished Beaumont Hotel and looked at the floor plans on the wall and thought about everything she had chosen to walk toward in the past 2 months, and whether she had been walking with her eyes open or just telling herself she was. The car would be there in 20 minutes. 26 people who needed this hotel to open clean. A man she had agreed to trust who was now asking her to trust him further in a direction she couldn't see. And somewhere on the other side of this night, Dominic Falcone, who had looked at her from across her desk with the patient confidence of a man who believed he had just planted something that would grow. Her phone buzzed. The car was outside. Clara Hughes picked up her bag, turned off the light, and walked out into the lobby of the Beaumont. Across the marble floor she had fought to uncover, past the front desk she had redesigned, through the building she had spent 2 months learning how to breathe, and through the front door into the December night. Whatever Gabriel Costa was about to tell her was going to change something. She could feel it the way she felt the storm in a room before anything broke. The question was whether it would change the thing she could recover from or the thing she... The car was a different one than usual. Clara noticed it before she registered that she had noticed it. The sedan waiting outside the Beaumont was black, same as always, but the plates were different, and the driver was not the wall of silence she had come to recognize. This one was younger, sharper-eyed, and he opened the door without making eye contact, which the other one always did. She got in anyway, because what was the alternative? She stand on Park Avenue in December and call Gabriel to ask why his car was different? She was already committed to the direction of this night. The only question was what she was going to find when she got there. They drove south, not toward the Midtown office building where she had met Gabriel twice for operational discussions, but further, downtown, through the lit canyons of the financial district, toward the water. She watched the city reorganize itself outside the window and kept her hands in her lap and her breathing deliberate. The car stopped in front of a building in Tribeca she didn't recognize. Not a residence, a converted warehouse space, the kind that looked like nothing from the street and cost everything inside. The driver opened her door and stood back. A man she didn't know held the building's front door. She walked through it. The interior was a long room with high ceilings and exposed brick, and the specific quality of light that came from fixtures aimed at walls rather than people. At the far end, around a table that had maps and documents spread across it, were 4 men. 3 she didn't know. 1 she did. Gabriel was standing with his back to the door, looking at something on the table, and he turned when he heard her footsteps on the concrete floor. Whatever he was feeling was, as usual, contained behind a face that had been trained over decades not to give things away. But there was something there. She caught it in the half-second before containment completed. He looked tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said you could prove it," she said. She did not sit down. She did not move toward the table. She stood where she was, 8 feet inside the door, and looked at him. "Prove it." One of the men at the table, 50s, silver-haired, the posture of someone accustomed to being the most credentialed person in any room, opened a folder and slid it to the near edge of the table. He did not explain himself. Gabriel said, "This is Arthur Brennan. He's an attorney." "Whose attorney?" "Currently, the Beaumont Hotels." Gabriel looked at her. Previously, he worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office for 12 years, Financial Crimes Division. Clara walked to the table. She looked at the folder without picking it up. The top document was a corporate structure chart, the Beaumont Hotel at the top, and below it a cascade of entities, LLC structures, holding companies, each one labeled and dated. "The Beaumont's ownership chain," Arthur Brennan said. His voice was the practiced voice of someone who had explained complicated things to skeptical people for most of his professional life. "Every entity in that chain has been audited independently in the past 6 months. The source of funds for the acquisition is documented and clean. The operating accounts are separate from all other Costa enterprises and are subject to independent third-party accounting review on a quarterly basis." He paused. "I designed that structure specifically to ensure that if anyone looks at the Beaumont, law enforcement, regulators, the Falcone family's attorneys, what they see is a property that cannot be used to move money, because the architecture makes it structurally impossible." Clara picked up the folder. She read. She was not a forensic accountant, but she had managed vendor contracts and event budgets for 3 years, and she knew how to follow a money trail well enough to see when one was clean. She turned pages. She looked at dates, entities, signatory names. She put the folder down. "Why didn't you show me this before I started?" she said. "Because this document becoming known outside this room creates a problem," Gabriel said. "The specific structure of the Beaumont's ownership chain is information the Falcones don't have. If they had it, they would know that their strategy of pressuring you, pressuring the hotel's operational staff, is a dead end. They'd move on to something more direct. You wanted them to keep focusing on me. I wanted them to keep focusing on the hotel," he said, "on personnel, on the approach they've already committed to. While they're pushing on that door, they're not looking at the other thing." She looked at him. "What other thing?" He glanced at Arthur Brennan, who closed the folder and moved away from the table toward the far side of the room. The other 2 men followed. The specific choreography of people excusing themselves from a conversation without appearing to. Gabriel and Clara were alone at the table. He sat. First time she had seen him move to sit in a room like this, not the controlled social gesture of the plaza library chair, but the motion of a man who had been standing for too long. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at the maps. The Falcones run 4 legitimate hospitality businesses, he said. Hotels, event spaces, a catering company. Those 4 businesses produce approximately $9 million a year in documented revenue. The actual cash moving through them is closer to 31. The difference is laundered. The difference is money from narcotics distribution, extortion, and 2 port operations in New Jersey that nobody has been able to touch for 11 years. He looked at her. The FBI's case against Meridian, against your former employer, was the first clean piece of evidence connecting Falcone money to a traceable entity. It's not enough on its own, but it's a start. Clara stood very still. And the Beaumont? The Beaumont's operational activity, guest bookings, event contracts, vendor payments, generates a financial footprint, a clean, documented, legitimate footprint. He paused. If the Falcones' hospitality businesses are operating alongside the Beaumont in the same market, their anomalous revenue becomes visible by comparison. She processed that. You're using the Beaumont as a baseline. I'm operating the Beaumont the way a legitimate hotel should be operated, he said. What anyone does with that comparison is their business. The FBI's business. He did not answer that directly. He didn't need to. Clara pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She looked at the table between them, the maps, the corporate structures, the documented clean money. She thought about Dominic Falcone in her office. You're going to be the person whose name is on the books. He told me you were using me, she said. He told you what he needed you to believe to make you walk away. Is he wrong? Gabriel looked at her. He held the look for a long time, which was its own kind of answer. A man buying time, which he almost never did. You are not being used, he said carefully. The work you're doing is real. The hotel is real. What you're building matters independently of anything else. She caught the word. Independently. Yes. But not separately. A beat. No. She sat with that. The fluorescent quiet of the room, the weight of the folder on the table. Dominic Falcone came to my office tonight, she said. He walked in without being stopped. That means either your security on the building failed or... She stopped. Gabriel's jaw tightened, barely visible. She almost missed it. Or someone let him in, he said. She had not wanted to get there. She arrived anyway. Marcus, she said. The name sat between them. I don't know yet, Gabriel said. He told me this afternoon that Falcone approached him. He said he turned it down. He said he wanted me to know. She pressed her fingers against the table. Was he being straight with me, or was that... I don't know yet, Gabriel said again. Harder this time. Not at her. She stood up. She needed to move. She walked to the edge of the table and back, 3 steps, which was all the space allowed, and she understood suddenly why people paced. It was the body insisting on doing something when the mind was stuck. 2 months, she said. I have been in that building for 2 months. I hired 26 people. I restructured the vendor contracts. I redesigned the lighting plan. I argued about marble and sconces and AV equipment. She stopped moving. I told Marcus to turn down the Falcone consultation. I vouched for him to you tonight. Clara, did he let Falcone in or didn't he? I'm going to find out, Gabriel said. Tonight. She looked at him. She wanted to ask a different question. The question underneath all the other questions. The one about whether she had been told enough to make real decisions or just enough to make useful ones. She wanted to ask it, and she didn't, because she wasn't certain she was ready for the answer. I'm going home, she said. I'll have someone. I don't need someone. She picked up her bag. I need you to find out about Marcus and tell me the truth in the morning, whatever the truth is. He stood. All right. All of it, she said. Not the version that keeps me calm. All of it. He looked at her for a moment. All of it, he said. She walked out. She did not sleep. She sat in her apartment with the lights on and her laptop open and spent 3 hours doing the things she did when she couldn't control a situation. She worked. She went through everything Marcus had touched in the past 2 months, not the things she had already reviewed, but the edges. The access logs she had never thought to check, the vendor correspondence she had seen copies of but not originals, the building security calendar for the past 6 weeks. The security calendar was hosted on the Beaumont's operational server, which she had access to as director. She had never looked at it in detail because it was Marcus's domain, and she had not, until tonight, had a reason to breach the operational boundary they had established. She looked at it now. The Beaumont's main entrance had a digital access log tied to the keycard system, not fully operational yet, because the building was still under renovation, but the system had been live since October for contractor access management. She pulled the log for that evening. Her own card, 8:47 p.m., main entrance. Dominic Falcone should not appear in this log because he should not have had a card. He didn't appear. But at 7:23 p.m., 84 minutes before Clara had returned from her last site walkthrough, Marcus Webb's card had activated the main entrance, and at 7:29, 6 minutes later, it had activated again. Entry and then re-entry, which was the access pattern of someone who had opened a door for another person and then returned inside. She stared at her screen. She looked at it again to make sure she was reading the timestamp correctly, because she had been awake for 17 hours and she wanted to be wrong. She was not wrong. She picked up her phone. It was 2:14 a.m. She called Gabriel. He answered immediately, which told her he had not been sleeping either. The access log, she said. Marcus's card, 7:23 p.m. Silence. You already know, she said. I found it 40 minutes ago. You were going to tell me in the morning. I was going to verify it first. It's verified. Her voice was flat. She could hear the flatness of it and couldn't change it. He let Falcone in. He sat across from me this afternoon and told me he'd turned down the approach, and then he went home and let Falcone walk into my office. Clara, why? She heard the word come out of her with a force that surprised her. Not anger, not yet. Something rawer than anger. Why would he? I gave him a way out with the vendor situation. I didn't go to you about it. I handled it between us. I thought there was something functional there. His cousin, Gabriel said. She stopped. The position that was supposed to go to his cousin. I had someone look into it tonight. His voice was careful. Marcus's family has Falcone connections going back 8 years. Not deep, not operational, but there. When the Beaumont acquisition happened and his cousin was passed over, the Falcones offered him an arrangement. It's been running in the background since August. August. Before she had arrived. Before she had sat across from him in the mezzanine and thought she was reading him correctly. The entire time, she said. The entire time. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a second. Not to stop crying. She wasn't crying. She was too far past tired for tears. She was in the flat white space on the other side of exhaustion, where everything felt slightly translucent. She pressed her hand over her mouth because she needed something solid. Okay, she said. What happens now? I'm removing him from the project tonight. If you remove him tonight, the Falcones know something changed. She was thinking out loud, which she didn't usually do with him, but it was 2 a.m. and the usual filters were worn through. They'll accelerate whatever they were planning. Whatever Dominic wanted from me tonight, getting me to doubt you, getting me to walk, that was the soft approach. If that doesn't work, they'll use something harder, Gabriel said. Yes. She looked at her laptop screen. The access log, 7:23 p.m. Don't remove him yet. Let me think. A pause. You want to leave him in place? I want to think for 8 hours before we make a decision that can't be undone. She closed the laptop. Can you give me 8 hours? Yes. She almost said goodnight. She didn't. Gabriel. A pause. The night at the plaza, when you caught me. She didn't know why she was saying this. Did you know who I was before that happened? The silence was different from his usual silences. Not calculating, something else. Yes, he said. How long? Since March. The Meridian launch event at the Park South venue. 7 months before the gala. 7 months before the night that had changed everything. She had been at that launch. She remembered it. An overlong program, a guest list that kept expanding, a catering snafu at 9 p.m. that she had resolved in under 12 minutes by redirecting the backup station. She had not known he was there. "You watched me work for 7 months," she said. "I watched you work for 7 months," he confirmed. She sat with that. With all of it. The 7 months and the plaza and the contract and the Beaumont and Marcus Webb and the access log at 7:23 p.m. and Dominic Falcone's hand in his jacket pocket and the 26 people who had taken jobs from her with the reasonable expectation that she knew what she was doing. 8 hours, she said. 8 hours, he said. She put the phone down and sat in her lit apartment until the sky outside began to change. She was back at the Beaumont at 7:30 a.m. Marcus arrived at 8, as he always did, with coffee from the place on Lexington and the particular expression of a man who had done something he had not fully decided how to feel about. Clara was in the lobby when he came in, standing at the front desk going over the millwork installation notes, and she looked up when the door opened and said, "Morning," with the same tone she always used. He said, "Morning," back. He looked at her for a fraction of a second longer than usual. She did not look at him for a fraction of a second longer than usual, which took effort and which she would not allow herself to think about. She spent 3 hours working normally. She had a call with the head of catering about the menu development timeline. She walked the mezzanine with the electrician who was troubleshooting the pendant lighting circuit. She signed off on 2 purchase orders. She reviewed the draft press release for the soft opening announcement. Normal, functional, operational. At 11:15, she went to Marcus's office. He looked up when she knocked. She always knocked, which he had noted early on because she had told him she wasn't going to walk into his space the way people walked into hers. "Got a minute?" she said. "Sure." He set down what he was working on. She came in. She did not sit. She stood on the near side of his desk, and she looked at him, and she said, very quietly, "I saw the access log." The blood didn't drain from his face. It was more subtle than that, more contained, the specific micro-contraction of a person whose body receives catastrophic information before the mind has fully caught up. His hands, which were flat on the desk, went very still. "Clara." "Don't," she said, not loud. She had been up for most of the night and she had no energy for loud. "Don't do the part where you explain. I need you to hear something first." He went quiet. "I vouched for you last night," she said, "to Gabriel. I told him you came to me, that you turned down the approach, that I thought you were being straight." She felt the words coming out of her with the specific weight of things that had mattered and now had to be reclassified. "I told him that, because I had decided to trust you." She paused. "You let Falcone walk into my office." Marcus's jaw moved, not speech, just the muscle working. "He had his hand in his jacket the entire time he was in there," she said. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? He sat across from me with his hand in his jacket, and I don't know what was in it, and I sat there and I handled it because that is what I do. And the whole time—" She stopped. She breathed. 1 breath. 2. "What did they give you?" she said. He looked at the desk. For a long moment he looked at the desk, and she watched the calculation move through him. The assessment of what she knew versus what she could prove versus what the next move was. She watched it, and she waited. "Money," he said. "How much?" 60,000, in 3 payments. She closed her eyes for a moment. $60,000. Not a fortune. Not enough for what it was going to cost him. "What were you supposed to do?" "Information," he said. "Operational updates. Staffing changes. Vendor decisions." He finally looked at her. Nothing that touched the money structure. Nothing financial. They just wanted to know what was happening inside the building. "And last night," he was quiet. "They called you and told you Falcone was coming and you let him in," she said. "They said it was just a conversation, that he wanted to make you an offer. I know what he wanted." She heard something sharp in her own voice and didn't pull it back. "He wanted me to doubt Gabriel and walk away and leave the Beaumont without operational direction 3 months before opening. That's what he wanted." She looked at Marcus. "He wanted to use me the same way you've been using me. As a door." The word landed hard. She watched it land. She didn't take it back. "What happens now?" he said. "I don't know yet." She looked at him. "I'm going to tell Gabriel the full picture this morning. What he decides to do with that is his business, not mine." She straightened. "Clear out anything personal from this office before noon." She walked out. Down the corridor, through the lobby, past the front desk and the restored marble floor and the sconces she had argued for, and she pushed through the front door into the December air and stood on the sidewalk and let the cold hit her face and breathed. 17 months of someone working inside this building against it. 6 weeks of her being here, thinking she was reading people correctly, building something real. She pulled out her phone. Gabriel answered before the first ring finished. She understood, distantly, that he had been waiting. "It was information brokering," she said. "Operational data. 3 payments, 60,000 total." He confirmed it. "All right." He didn't know about the financial structure. He didn't have access to it. She needed to say that, not to protect Marcus. She was done protecting Marcus, but because it mattered to the actual problem. Whatever Falcone knows about the Beaumont's ownership chain, he didn't get it from inside. "Good," Gabriel said. Not relief, just the acknowledgement of a variable being settled. "I told him to clear out by noon. I'll have someone there at noon." Gabriel, she looked at the street. A cab went by. 2 people walking fast, heads down against the cold. Normal city morning. Falcone's going to know by tonight that the inside access is gone. He's going to know the soft approach failed. He's going to know I'm still standing. Yes. What does he do next? A pause. Not a long one. "He stops being patient," Gabriel said. The words settled into her chest with the specific weight of things you heard and wished you hadn't. "And us?" she said. "What do we do next?" "We stop being reactive." His voice was different, not warmer but cleaner somehow, stripped of the diplomatic layering. "I need you to stay in the building. Keep the work moving. Don't change the patterns. Don't signal that anything has shifted." A pause. "Can you do that?" "I've been doing that all morning," she said. Something in the silence. "I know," he said. She went back inside. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of her professional life. Stranger, even, than the night she had been fired, because at least that night the damage had been visible. This was the opposite. A surface of complete normality stretched over something that had stopped being normal. Marcus was gone. His replacement in the operations role was a man Gabriel sent, a quiet, capable person named Jonathan Park, who knew construction timelines and said very little, and whose principal quality, as far as Clara could determine, was that he had no existing relationships with anyone who might compromise the building. Clara worked. She worked the way she had always worked, arriving early, staying late, moving through the building with a clipboard and a mental map of every outstanding item. She hired the last 3 positions in the guest experience team. She finalized the soft opening program, a private event for 70 guests. Invitation only, the kind of event designed to generate the specific quality of word of mouth that money couldn't buy, but preparation could earn. She ate lunch at her desk. She reviewed vendor invoices. She answered emails at 11 p.m. She did not allow herself to think about Dominic Falcone's hand in his jacket pocket. She did not allow herself to think about what stops being patient meant, operationally, for a man with the Falcone family's resources. She almost managed it. On a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week of December, 2 things happened within 20 minutes of each other. The first, her phone showed a text from an unknown number, 4 words. "Ask him about Renata." She stared at it. She typed back, "Who is this?" No response. She sat at her desk for 6 minutes, which was long enough to convince herself she was not going to be able to let it go, and then she picked up her phone and called Gabriel. "I got a text," she said. "Unknown number, 4 words." She read it to him. The silence on the other end was the longest she had ever gotten from him. Longer than the night she'd asked if the Beaumont was clean. Longer than the 8-hour pause. Long enough that she felt it as something physical, a shift in pressure. "Gabriel, where are you?" "My office, the building." "Don't leave," he said. "I'll be there in 30 minutes." He hung up. She sat with the name, Renata. She had no reference for it. She ran it through everything she knew about Gabriel's operation, his history, his business structure. Nothing. A woman's name, uncommon enough to be specific. The second thing happened 18 minutes later. Her office door opened. Jonathan Park stood in the doorway and his face was wrong, not frightened. Jonathan Park did not appear to be a man who frightened easily. But something had happened to his composure, and she had the specific perception of someone who has just come from something that jarred them. "There are two men at the main entrance," he said. "They're not contractors. They asked for you by name." Clara stood up. "Did they say who they are?" "Falcone Property Management," she breathed. "Tell them Miss Hughes is not available." "I did." Jonathan's expression adjusted slightly. "They said they'd wait." She looked at him. "How many of our staff are in the building right now?" He counted mentally. 7, 8, including me. "Tell everyone to go home, normal dismissal. Don't make it urgent. Don't explain. Just tell them we're closing early for the night." "And the two men at the door?" She picked up her phone. Gabriel was 30 minutes away, minimum. Probably less. She suspected "I'll be there in 30 minutes" from Gabriel Costa meant something different than it meant for most people. But still. "Leave them at the door," she said. "Don't let them in. If they push—" Her phone rang. Unknown number, the same one as the text. She looked at Jonathan. "Give me a minute." He stepped out. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, low, accented, not heavily, but enough to place Eastern European somewhere, controlled in the specific way of someone who had learned control as a survival mechanism rather than a social grace. "You got my text," the woman said. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what Dominic Falcone keeps in the basement of the building on West 19th Street. A pause. "And someone who knows what he's planning for your hotel." Clara's hand tightened on the phone. "I'm listening." "Not on the phone," the woman said. "There's a coffee place on Lex, 2 blocks north of you. Estrada's. I'm here now." "I don't know who you are." "My name is Renata," the woman said. "I was Gabriel Costa's wife." The floor did not move. Clara stood in her office in the Beaumont Hotel at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in December, and the floor did not move. But something in her understanding of the past 3 months did. A quiet, irreversible shift, the kind that happened when information arrived that retroactively changed the shape of everything before it. Was. Past tense. "How long?" Clara said. The question came out before she had decided to ask it. "We divorced 4 years ago." The woman's voice was neutral. "It's not what you're thinking." "You don't know what I'm thinking." "I know what women think when they hear that name." A pause. "I'm not calling you because of Gabriel. I'm calling you because of what Dominic Falcone is going to do to your hotel and everyone in it if someone doesn't stop him. And right now, the only person positioned to stop him is you." Clara looked at her office door, at the empty corridor beyond it, at the building she had spent 2 months learning how to make into something worth protecting. "2 blocks north," she said. "Table in the back. I've been here an hour." Clara grabbed her coat, her phone, her keys. She walked to the door. She stopped. She texted Gabriel. "Estrada's on Lex, 2 blocks north. Come there instead." Then she walked out of her office, through the lobby of the Beaumont, past the 2 men standing at the main entrance who tracked her movement with the particular attention of people who had been told to watch for her, and she turned north on Lexington Avenue and walked into the December night toward a woman she had never heard of until 20 minutes ago, who had once been married to the man Clara had spent 3 months deciding whether or not to trust, and who was the only person in New York apparently willing to tell her what was actually Estrada's was the kind of coffee place that had survived 3 decades of Manhattan real estate pressure by being exactly what it was. Narrow, warm, smelling of espresso and old wood, with no aesthetic ambition beyond keeping the lights on and the cups full. Clara pushed through the door at 7:51 p.m. and felt the heat hit her face after the December cold outside. The woman in the back was not what she had expected, though she could not have said precisely what she had expected. Renata Costa, Renata, whatever her name was now, was perhaps 40, dark-haired, with the kind of bone structure that photographs well, and the kind of eyes that had stopped caring about that. She was wearing a gray coat and holding a coffee cup with both hands, and she looked up when Clara came in with the specific attention of someone who had been watching the door for an hour and knew exactly who they were waiting for. Clara walked to the back. She did not take her coat off. She sat down across from the woman and put her phone on the table face up, where she could see it, and said nothing. Renata looked at the phone. "He's coming." "Yes." "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Clara looked at her. "Start talking." Renata set down her cup. She had the hands of someone who worked, not manual labor, but the specific worn-in quality of hands that typed and wrote and operated in the world rather than being maintained. "How much do you know about the West 19th Street building?" "Nothing." "Falcone uses it for storage, not merchandise, documents, financial records, communications, evidence of arrangements going back 15 years. She said it with the flat precision of someone reciting facts they had lived with long enough that the horror of them had become functional. 4 years ago, when I was still married to Gabriel, I found out that Dominic Falcone had a file in that building specifically on our marriage. Surveillance, conversations, financial transfers I had made that were, she paused, the first pause, that were being used. Used how? As leverage. She looked at Clara directly. Not against Gabriel. Against me. Dominic had evidence that I had accepted money from a Falcone-adjacent account. Not knowingly, not directly, but traceable if you constructed the trail carefully enough. He used it to keep me cooperative. Cooperative with what? Information. About Gabriel's schedule, his meetings. Nothing operational. I didn't have operational access, but logistics. Where he would be, when. Clara felt the shape of this settling into something cold and solid. You were feeding them information about your own husband. For 11 months, Renata said. The words came out without self-pity, which was somehow worse than if they had. Before I understood what I was doing and stopped. What happened when you stopped? Gabriel found out. She looked at the table. He was... She stopped. Started again. He handled it the way he handles everything. He built a wall around it and moved forward. We divorced. He removed me from everything. A pause. He never told anyone. He contained it. Clara sat with that. Gabriel contained it. Of course he did. She had watched him contain things for 3 months and had never quite understood the extent of what that meant. Not just emotional control, but the specific discipline of a man who had learned to absorb damage and keep moving because the alternative was collapse, and collapse was not permitted. Why are you telling me this now? Clara said. 4 years later. Because Dominic still has the file. Renata's voice changed slightly, not softer but more direct. And because 3 weeks ago he made contact with me again. Clara went still. He wants me to approach Gabriel, to use whatever remaining connection I have, and there isn't much, but there's something, 4 years isn't nothing, to get close enough to deliver a message. She looked at Clara. The message is that if Gabriel doesn't pull back from the Falcone territory strategy, Dominic goes public with the file, with the surveillance, with the evidence that Gabriel Costa's wife was an informant inside his operation for nearly a year. It would destroy him, Clara said. Professionally, yes. Legally, possibly. The FBI has an ongoing file on Gabriel that has never produced charges. Evidence that his inner circle was compromised from the inside would reopen every closed investigation. She paused. It would also destroy Gabriel's credibility with every relationship he has, every arrangement, every alliance. Clara looked at this woman across the coffee shop table and did what she did best. She mapped the architecture of it, the shape of the trap, the load-bearing walls, where it would hold and where it would fail. You didn't agree, she said. No. But you didn't warn Gabriel either. Renata's jaw tightened. I tried. 3 weeks ago I sent a message through a mutual contact. It didn't reach him the way I intended. She looked at Clara. Tonight I tried again. Through you. The door of the coffee shop opened. Gabriel came in fast, faster than Clara had expected, which meant he had been closer than 30 minutes when she called, or he had driven in a way that was unkind to traffic laws. He was in a dark coat, no tie, and his eyes went to Clara first. A single sweep that assessed her physical state with the efficiency of someone who had spent the trip over running through possible scenarios. And then to Renata. He stopped. The moment between them lasted perhaps 3 seconds and contained, Clara estimated, approximately 4 years of compressed history. Then Gabriel walked to the table and stood, and did not sit down. "Renata," he said. "Gabriel." She looked up at him. "I know what you're thinking." "You don't. You're thinking I'm here because Dominic sent me. Aren't you?" He tried. She met his eyes. "I'm here because I chose to be. There's a difference." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair beside Clara, not across the table, beside her, and sat down. And Clara felt the proximity of him as something specific and deliberate, the way you felt the placement of objects that had been arranged with intent. "Tell me," he said to Renata. She told him. All of it. The same things she had told Clara, plus details she hadn't led with. The specific contents of the file, the communications Dominic had referenced, the timeline of his reapproach, the nature of the ultimatum. She talked for 11 minutes. Clara watched Gabriel's face during those 11 minutes and saw almost nothing, which she had learned by now meant a great deal. When Renata finished, Gabriel said, "The file. Do you know where specifically it's kept in the building?" "4th floor. There's a room behind the accounting office. It's behind a panel in the west wall, not a door. You need to know it's there." She reached into her bag and put a folded piece of paper on the table. "The layout. From memory, but accurate." Gabriel looked at the paper without picking it up. "Why?" "Because I owe you that," Renata said. "I owed you that 4 years ago. I'm paying it late." Her voice didn't shake. She had clearly made the decision not to let it shake before she came here. "And because whatever you do next, I'd rather it be with full information than without." Gabriel picked up the paper. He folded it once and put it in his coat pocket. He stood up. "Thank you," he said. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was the acknowledgement of a debt logged. Renata nodded once. She looked at Clara. "He doesn't tell people what they need to know when he thinks he's protecting them," she said. "In my experience, that's more dangerous than whatever he thinks he's protecting them from." Clara looked at her. "I know," she said. Renata gathered her things and walked out of Estrada's without looking back. Clara watched the door close behind her, then turned to Gabriel. He was looking at the table. His hand was in his coat pocket, around the folded paper. "Were you going to tell me?" she said. "About Renata. About any of it. The marriage, the file, the fact that Falcone has evidence that can be used against you personally, not just the business, you." He looked at her. "I was managing it." "You were managing me," she said. "There's a difference." The muscle in his jaw moved. She had learned what that meant. Not anger at her, but the specific tension of a man confronting a true thing he would have preferred to remain untrue. "Yes," he said. The honesty of it landed the same way it always did with him, disarming, a little destabilizing, the response she couldn't argue with because it was exactly what she had asked for. "What's on 19th Street?" she said. He looked at her. "Besides the file," she said. "You didn't ask Renata about the layout because you want to retrieve paperwork. What's in that building?" A long pause. The longest she had gotten from him in person. She waded through it. "The Falcone family's operational records for the past decade," he said. "Financial trails, distribution networks, port contacts, the names of every law enforcement official they've paid. Not the laundering records, but the FBI already has a thread on those. The structural records, the architecture of the whole operation." He paused. "If that material reaches the right hands, the case against them isn't a thread. It's a net." Clara processed that. "You've known about this building since August. Before you hired me." "Yes." She sat back. "And the Beaumont, the legitimate footprint, the financial baseline." She could hear herself assembling it, the pieces clicking into their actual positions rather than the positions she had been given. "You weren't just protecting the hotel from Falcone pressure. You were drawing them out, making them move against us so they'd be moving while you moved on them. Gabriel did not confirm or deny. He didn't need to. I was bait, she said. You were never in danger that I wasn't managing. That's not what I said. Clara, I was bait. She said it without volume, without drama, just the word settling into its accurate place. You needed Dominic to focus on the Beaumont, on me, because while he was doing that, we could establish the chain of custody for the records, Gabriel said. Yes. She looked at him. She looked at him for long enough that he held the look without trying to fill it, which was the right thing to do, and she noticed that he knew it. The opening is in 3 weeks, she said finally. Yes. If this isn't resolved before the opening, it will be. That's not a plan, that's a preference. She leaned forward. I need to know what the actual plan is, not the version designed to keep me calm, the version where I understand what I'm walking into when I open those doors in 3 weeks. He was quiet for a moment, then, tonight I'm going to retrieve the file, the one with Renata's information. That removes Falcone's leverage. And the operational records. I have people who can move on the building, but not tonight. Tonight is the file. What about Dominic? When the leverage is gone, his position changes. A man without leverage negotiates differently. Or he stops negotiating. Gabriel's eyes were steady. That too is a possibility. She sat with all of it. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. Outside, Lexington Avenue moved through its nighttime version, cabs and pedestrians and the specific indifferent energy of a city that had no investment in any particular person's crisis. I'm coming with you, she said. No. Gabriel. No. It was the first time she had heard him say no to her with that particular finality. Not the negotiating position no. The actual no. What you can do, what I need you to do, is go back to the Beaumont. Stay in the building tonight. Keep the lights on and the work moving. If Dominic is watching, I need him watching the hotel, not the building on 19th Street. She looked at him. You need me to be bait again. I need you to be safe in a building with security I control while I handle the part that requires me to be somewhere else. He looked at her. Those are not the same thing, she breathed. The 2 men at the Beaumont entrance. They'll be gone by the time you get back. My people are already there. She stood up. She picked up her phone from the table. She put on her coat. Gabriel? She looked at him. Come back. It was the simplest thing she had said to him in 3 months. 2 words, no architecture, no operational framing, just the raw thing underneath all of it. He looked at her for a moment. I'll be at the Beaumont by midnight, he said. She walked out into the December night and went back to work. Sunk. The Beaumont at 8:30 p.m. was different from the Beaumont during the day. Quieter, the renovation sounds replaced by the settling of a building finding its nighttime temperature, the work lights in the lobby casting long shadows across the marble floor that Clara had come to think of as hers in the way you thought of spaces you had poured yourself into. Jonathan Park was in the lobby when she arrived. He had stayed, which she had not asked him to do, and which she registered without comment. The 2 men left, he said, 20 minutes ago. I know. He looked at her. What do you need? I need the building to look occupied and operational. She was already moving toward the stairs. Whatever we have scheduled for tonight's work, keep it running. Don't reduce the crew. We have 3 contractors on the mezzanine electrical. Good. Keep them. She stopped. Jonathan, tonight might get complicated. If anything happens that doesn't look right, anyone comes to the entrance, any vehicle you don't recognize parked outside for more than 10 minutes, you call me first and Gabriel's number second. He nodded once. No questions. She had already decided she liked him. She went to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. She worked. Or she did the thing that looked like working, which tonight was the same thing because the work was real, and the only way she knew how to hold herself together in a situation she couldn't control was to operate inside the one she could. At 9:40, her phone buzzed. A text from Gabriel. 1 word. Inside. She breathed. At 10:12, another text. File. She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. At 10:47, Nothing. She stared at her phone. Nothing. 11 p.m., 11:15. She was standing at the window of her office by then, looking down at Park Avenue, which gave her nothing useful and which she continued to look at because sitting down was no longer possible. At 11:22, her phone rang. Unknown number. Not Renata's. A different one. Ms. Hughes, a voice she recognized immediately, though she had only heard it once. This is a courtesy call. Dominic Falcone. Her hand tightened on the phone. Where is he? Somewhere inconvenient. A pause. We found the team he sent. They were very professional, a little predictable. His voice had lost the patient pleasantness of the office visit. This was a different register, still controlled, but with something beneath it that had sharp edges. He'll be fine. I'm not interested in that kind of problem tonight. I'm interested in a conversation. With me. With both of you. Which means I need you to do something for me. She walked to her office door. Jonathan was in the lobby. She could hear him on a call with the contractors. What? I need you to come to the Beaumont's loading dock entrance, the south side. Come now. Alone. And I will guarantee Gabriel Costa walks out of the building on West 19th Street in the same condition he walked in. And if I don't? The pause was short. I think you know the answer to that. She pressed her hand against the door frame. She felt the wood solid against her palm. She thought about Gabriel's voice. I'll be at the Beaumont by midnight. She thought about the 2 words she had said to him that she had not planned to say. She thought about 26 people and a marble floor and 3 weeks to opening and Renata's face in the coffee shop saying he doesn't tell people what they need to know. Give me 10 minutes, she said. 5, Falcone said. And Ms. Hughes? I'll know if you make a call before you come down. He hung up. She stood in her office for 7 seconds, counting them. 7 seconds was not enough time to make a good decision and was more time than she had. She could call Gabriel's number. It would ring to someone, whoever was with him or whoever wasn't, or a phone in a pocket in a building on West 19th Street. She did not know what would happen when it rang. She looked at her desk, at the vendor files and the staff schedules and the opening timeline and the 3 weeks of work that sat on top of everything she had built in the past 2 months. She looked at her laptop, open to the soft opening program she had spent a week refining. She picked up a pen. She wrote 4 words on the back of an invoice. Loading dock, South Side. She walked out of her office, dropped the paper on Jonathan Park's desk as she passed it, made eye contact with him for exactly 1 second, and kept walking. He looked at the paper. He looked at her back. She pushed through the door to the south corridor. The loading dock entrance was at the back of the building, accessed through a corridor that the renovation crew used for materials. At this hour, it was empty. The day's delivery work done, the fluorescent lights in the corridor giving everything the flat quality of an institutional space that had never been intended for anything other than function. Her footsteps were loud on the concrete floor. She was aware of her own breathing. She pushed open the loading dock door. The dock itself was a covered platform off the alley between the Beaumont and the building adjacent. There was a van parked at the base of the dock. Black, no markings, engine off. 2 men stood at the far edge of the platform, and at the center of the dock, directly under the single overhead light, was Dominic Falcone. He looked different than he had in her office, less polished. The patient quality was still there, but it was thinner now, pulled tight over something that was working harder than it wanted to. Thank you for coming, he said. You didn't give me much choice. I gave you a choice. He put his hands in his coat pockets. Both of them, not just the one. She logged that. I want to be reasonable, Ms. Hughes. I've been trying to be reasonable since September. The people around you haven't given that effort the space it needed. She stood on the dock platform 5 feet from him and kept her breathing even. What do you want? I want you to understand the position you're in. He took a step toward her. Not threatening. Demonstrative. The movement of a man illustrating a point. The Beaumont opens in 3 weeks. You have a staff, you have bookings, you have a program. You've done genuinely impressive work. I've been told that by people who know. He looked at her with something that was almost in a different context, admirable. Walk away from it. She stared at him. Walk away. Take a position somewhere else. There are 20 hotels in this city that would hire you tomorrow. Better positions, cleaner situations. You leave the Beaumont, resign, tonight, publicly. And I let Gabriel Costa walk out of that building, and I leave the hotel alone. You leave it alone, she said. To do what? To be sold. Costa will liquidate when the pressure is sufficient. The property goes to a buyer who has appropriate uses for it. He looked at her steadily. That's the end of the situation. Clean. Nobody gets hurt. Clara looked at this man. She felt her heartbeat in her ears, which was the body's specific response to situations the body knew were dangerous before the mind caught up. She felt the concrete of the dock under her feet. She thought about the file Gabriel had gone to retrieve, whether he had it, whether it was already out of Falcone's hands, whether the leverage had already shifted before this phone call. She thought about Renata's voice. The only person positioned to stop him is you. I'm not leaving the Beaumont, she said. Falcone's expression changed, not to anger, to something more considered, more dangerous in its way than anger. Ms. Hughes, I'm not leaving. She held his gaze. And I don't think Gabriel is still in that building. I think whatever you had on him 3 hours ago has changed. She watched his face for the tell and got it. A fraction of a second, barely visible, a compression around the eyes. You called me because it changed, not to be reasonable, because something went wrong on 19th Street and I'm what you have left to push on. Falcone was very still. So push, she said, or don't, but stop performing the reasonable conversation because neither of us has the patience for it. The two men at the far end of the dock shifted. She heard it rather than saw it. The adjustment of weight, the specific preparation of bodies that had been standing still and were no longer intending to. Her pulse kicked hard. The dock door behind her opened, not quietly. It opened the way doors opened when the person coming through them had decided that the geometry of a situation needed to change. Clara turned her head. Gabriel Costa walked through the loading dock door with the particular movement of a man who had been in a building on West 19th Street for the past 2 hours and had not had a pleasant time of it and did not intend to let that affect his pace. His coat was gone. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that had dried rather than been treated. His eyes went to Clara first. The same single sweep as the coffee shop, physical assessment, status confirmed. And then to Dominic Falcone. Falcone's expression completed its transformation. The reasonable conversation was fully gone now. In its place was the face of a man looking at something that should not be in the room. The file, Gabriel said. He was talking to Falcone. His voice was the same as it always was. The controlled quiet. It's gone. Renata's information is gone. Everything in that room is gone. He came to stand beside Clara. Not in front of her. Beside. You have nothing. Falcone's hand moved in his coat pocket. Don't, Gabriel said. The word was so quiet it was almost not a word. But the two men at the far end of the dock stopped moving, and Clara understood that something in the dock's geometry had changed while she was watching Falcone, that the people who had come through the door behind Gabriel were not only Gabriel. Falcone looked around the dock. He did the math. She watched him do it, watched the calculation run, and produce an output he didn't want. His hand came out of his pocket, empty. You think this is the end of something, he said, to Gabriel, not to her. It's not. I know, Gabriel said, but tonight it's the end of this. Falcone looked at Clara. It was the look she had gotten in her office. The one performing something sympathetic to someone he intended to use. But it was different now. Stripped down. Whatever the performance had been covering was visible underneath it, and what was underneath was not a patient man but an angry one, a man who had been operating from a position of leverage for so long that the removal of it had left him raw. You think he's worth it? Falcone said to her. Everything you've walked into here, everything you don't know, you think it's worth it. Clara looked at him. She thought about the answer, and then she thought about the fact that the answer was actually not the most important thing happening on this loading dock right now. What was most important was Falcone's hand, which had come out of the pocket but was not relaxed, and the two men at the far end, and the 3 weeks to the opening, and the 26 people, and the marble floor. I think, she said, that you should leave. Falcone looked at her for one more second. Then he looked at Gabriel. Then he turned and walked to the far end of the dock, and his two men moved with him, and they went down the dock steps to the alley without looking back. The van started. She heard it pull away. The dock was quiet. Clara let out a breath that she had been holding, she realized, for approximately 4 minutes. Her hands, which had been perfectly still throughout, were shaking slightly now that the reason to hold them still was gone. She pressed them against her thighs. Gabriel turned to her. I told you to stay inside, he said. Jonathan got the note, she said. He called your number. I know. I was already moving. He looked at her. The cut above his eyebrow was small, but it had bled and dried, and was the most obvious evidence of whatever had happened in the building on West 19th Street that he was not going to describe to her in detail, and possibly not at all. Are you all right? I'm fine. She looked at the cut. You're not. I'm fine. That's... She stopped. She looked at him. You were supposed to be here at midnight. I was delayed. I know you were delayed. Falcone called me and told me you were delayed, which is why I'm standing on a loading dock in December instead of in my office. She heard her own voice, which was more jagged than she had intended, the adrenaline looking for somewhere to go. What happened in the building? Later. Gabriel, later. He said it firmly, but without the finality he had used earlier about her not coming to him. This was a different kind of later, the kind that was a promise rather than a door closed. Right now I need you to tell me you're all right. She looked at him. I'm all right. You're sure? I came down to a loading dock to face Dominic Falcone alone at 11:30 at night, she said. I'm functional. I'll be all right when this is over. Something moved in his face, not the micro-adjustment she usually caught, but something more visible, the specific change in a person's expression when they receive information that costs them something to receive. You came down here alone, he said. You were in the building. Clara, he said he'd let you walk out. She met his eyes. The dock light above them was doing nothing flattering, but she was past caring about the light. I was not going to leave you in there because I was afraid of a loading dock. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. A long, full, unguarded moment. The kind she had gotten briefly at the plaza when he said yes and then hadn't gotten again. Not like this. Not without the operational layer over it. The file is destroyed, he said. His voice was different. Still quiet, but different. Renata is clear. The leverage Falcone had on me is gone. And the operational records? Being transferred to people who will know what to do with them. He paused. By morning, Dominic Falcone will understand that the thing he has been trying to protect for 11 years is gone. And then he will have a choice to make. Gabriel looked at her steadily. A desperate man is more dangerous than a strategic one. The next few days are going to be worse before they're better, she said. Yes. She nodded. She breathed. She looked at the loading dock, the concrete platform, the overhead light, the door to the corridor she had walked through 17 minutes ago with her heart in her throat and nothing in her hands. I need to go back to my office, she said. I have 3 weeks of work to finish. I know. And you need someone to look at that cut. I know that too. She walked past him toward the door. She was 2 steps from it when his hand caught her arm. Not to stop her, not forcefully, just the contact of fingers on her coat sleeve, the specific pressure of a hand that had made a decision about where to be. She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. She stood with her back to him and his hand on her arm in the cold of the loading dock, and she felt everything she had spent 3 months not examining pressing against the inside of her chest with the weight of something that was done waiting for a convenient moment. She turned. He was close. The dock wasn't large, and she had only gone 2 steps and he hadn't moved. And close was what happened. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the cut above his eyebrow was real, and the marble floor upstairs was real, and the 26 people and the 3 weeks were real. And underneath all of it, underneath every operational layer and every professional boundary and every carefully maintained distance, Gabriel, she said. I know, he said. And then Dominic Falcone's van came back around the corner of the alley, and the side door opened, and the man who stepped out of it was not one of the two from the dock, but someone new, someone she hadn't seen before, and in his hand was the man stepping out of the van had a gun. Clara saw it the way you saw things in moments like that. Not as a sequence, but all at once, the complete picture arriving before any single part of it had time to process separately. The van door, the figure, the arm extending, the specific geometry of a weapon being raised in a covered alley at 11:40 p.m. with exactly 2 witnesses and no one else within earshot. Gabriel moved. She had not seen him move like that before. Everything she knew about him had been constructed from stillness. The controlled quiet, the contained force, the man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. What she saw now was the other side of that same coin. A man whose stillness was not the absence of motion but its compression, and when it released completely. He put himself between her and the alley in one step, and in the same motion his hand closed around her arm and drove her left, hard, behind the concrete loading dock pillar on the south side of the platform. She hit the pillar with her shoulder and felt it, sharp, immediate, real. And then Gabriel was beside her with his back against the concrete and his body angled out toward the alley. The shot went wide. She heard it, not the movie sound of gunfire, but the actual sound, which was shorter and more violent and left a ringing in the ear on that side. The concrete above them took it. Fragments of it came down. "Stay," Gabriel said. He went around the pillar low and fast. She stayed, not because she was told to, but because she had enough operational clarity left to understand that the best thing she could do in the next 30 seconds was not be a variable he had to account for. She pressed her back against the concrete and breathed through her nose and listened. What she heard was not a sustained exchange. It was brief and brutal, and it lasted perhaps 40 seconds. And during those 40 seconds, she did not close her eyes, because closing her eyes felt like a surrender she wasn't prepared to make. She listened to movement, feet on the dock, the impact of bodies, something hitting the metal dock railing, a sound that was not a shot, but was the sound adjacent to one, and then silence. Real silence. The kind that meant something was over. She came around the pillar. Gabriel was standing at the edge of the dock. The man from the van was on the ground at the base of the dock steps, and he was not unconscious, but he was not standing, and the gun was on the concrete 4 feet from his hand. Gabriel's left hand was at his side, and his right was pressed against his ribs, and his breathing was different than it had been. Controlled, but working for it. She went to him. "You're hit," she said. "I'm not—" He stopped. The press of his hand against his ribs was not something she was going to let him explain away. It grazed. "Show me." "Clara, show me right now." He moved his hand. She pulled the edge of his shirt and saw it. A line along the left side of his rib cage, not a through shot, a graze like he said, but deep enough and bleeding with the specific insistence of wounds that needed more than pressure. She pressed her hand against it. He made a sound that was not quite a sound, suppressed before it fully formed. "All right," he said. "All right, what?" "All right, it's worse than I said." "Yes." She kept her hand where it was. "Where are your people?" "Coming." "When?" "Now." His voice was tight. "Jonathan called. They were 2 minutes out when you came to the dock." She looked at the alley. The man on the ground was not moving toward the gun. She looked back at Gabriel. He was looking at her with the full attention he gave everything, but there was something in it now that the effort of the past hour had stripped the usual layering from. He looked like a man who was using some portion of his available resources to stay upright and was allocating the rest to looking at her face. "You came through the door," she said. "You were already in the building." "I heard the call with Falcone." His voice was steadier than it had a right to be. "Jonathan had it on speaker when he called my number. I was in the south corridor when you pushed the dock door." "You let me walk out onto the dock. You were already through the door." He held her gaze. "And I knew you weren't going to stop." She thought about arguing with that. She let it go. 2 of Gabriel's men came into the alley from the north end. She didn't know them by name, but she recognized the one on the right from the night of the Gala, standing point at Gabriel's VIP table. They assessed the situation in the efficient way of people trained to assess situations, and one of them moved to the man on the ground, and the other came to Gabriel. "Car's on park," he said. "Hospital," Clara said. Gabriel looked at her. "I don't—" "You've been grazed by a bullet," she said. "You're going to a hospital." A pause. "I have people who—" "Gabriel." She looked at him. Not the professional voice, not the operational voice, just her. "Hospital." He was quiet for a moment, then, "All right." The hospital was not a conversation she was going to reconstruct in detail afterward, because the details, the waiting, the forms, the fluorescent lights, the particular loneliness of a hospital waiting room at 1 a.m, were not the part that mattered. What mattered was that at 3:47 a.m. a doctor came through a set of double doors and told her that the wound had been cleaned and closed and that he was going to be fine. And she sat with that information for approximately 10 seconds before her body decided it had been holding itself together long enough, and she put her face in her hands and breathed. She did not cry. She sat with her face in her hands and breathed until the shaking stopped, and then she put her hands in her lap and looked at the wall and waited. He came out at 4:30, moving carefully, but moving. Someone had given him a clean shirt from somewhere, which was the kind of logistical detail that happened around Gabriel Costa without being orchestrated visibly. He sat down in the chair beside her, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "The Falcone operative," she said finally. "In custody." He said it like a fact. "The others from the dock, too. By morning, Dominic is going to understand the full scope of what was moved out of 19th Street and what it means for him." A pause. "His attorneys will be calling him before dawn. And then the leverage runs the other direction," Gabriel said. "He either negotiates or he runs. Either way, he is no longer a threat to the Beaumont or anyone in it." Clara nodded. She looked at the hospital wall. It was beige, which was what hospital walls were, and it had a small scuff at eye level that someone had not gotten around to repainting. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Yes. And I want you to answer it the way you answered things at 2 a.m. when I told you to give me all of it." A pause. "All right. When this is over," she said, "when the Falcones are dealt with and the Beaumont opens and everything settles, what am I to you?" The question was in the room now. She had said it, which was the thing she had been not saying for 3 months, while she learned a building and hired 26 people and sat in a coffee shop across from his ex-wife, and stood on a loading dock with her hand against a wound and her body between him and the alley. Gabriel was quiet for long enough that she turned to look at him. He was looking at her already, which she had expected. He always was. "You know what you are," he said. "I need you to say it." "Clara." "Gabriel." She held his eyes. "Say it." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he said, "You are the person I have been most careful with," which is a way of saying you are the person who matters most, and I don't say that about people. He paused. "And I handled it badly. The protection became the problem. I know that." "Yes," she said. "It did." "I know." She looked at him, at the cut above his eyebrow that had been cleaned but was still visible, at the careful way he was sitting with his injured side, at the face she had spent 3 months reading in corridors and cars, and a plaza library, and a Tribeca warehouse, and a loading dock at midnight. "I'm not Renata," she said. "I know that. I mean," she thought about how to say it. "What happened with her? The thing that broke. It broke because she didn't have full information and she made decisions in the dark. I don't operate in the dark, Gabriel. I can't. That's not who I am." "I know who you are," he said. "Then you understand that going forward, whatever this is, I need to be told things. Not the managed version, not the version designed to keep me functional. The real thing, when it matters." He held her gaze. Something in it was as open as she had ever seen him, which was not very open by most people's standards, but which was, she understood now, a great deal for him. "Yes," he said. "I can do that." She nodded. She looked at the wall, the scuff at eye level. "I'm going back to the Beaumont," she said. "It's 5 a.m. "I know, I have things to finish." She stood up. He stood too, and for a second she thought he was going to say something that would require her to respond. and she was not certain she had the resources left tonight for what she would respond with. But he didn't say anything. He put his hand against her face briefly, just the back of his fingers against her cheek, warm and real and gone in a moment, and then he stepped back. She walked out of the hospital into the early morning of December, which was cold and dark and smelled like the city at the hour when it had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. She got in the car that was waiting and went back to the Beaumont. 3 weeks later, on a Friday evening in January, the Beaumont Hotel held its soft opening. 70 guests, invitation only. The lobby lit the way Clara had fought to light it, warm without being dim, precise without being clinical, the marble floor reflecting the sconces she had argued for until the lighting designer had agreed they were right. The front desk millwork gleamed. The mezzanine above was open, the private dining space set for the first service it would ever run. The pendant lights at exactly the temperature she had specified after 2 days of argument. The staff was in position 40 minutes before the first guest arrived. Clara had briefed them that morning. Not the operational briefing, which they already knew, but the other one, the one about what it meant to do this work well. She had told them what she always tried to tell the people who worked events with her, that the job was not to be invisible. The job was to be present in the way that made other people feel held, seen, attended to, not managed. There was a difference. She knew the difference better than she knew most things. The guests arrived. The evening ran. She moved through it the way she had moved through every event of her professional life, reading the room, filling gaps, anticipating the next failure before it landed. But it was different now. Not because the stakes were lower, they were objectively, and she was aware of that, but because she was different. Something in the way she occupied the room had shifted, and she felt it in small ways. The straightness of her shoulders that didn't require effort, the directness of her eye contact with guests who introduced themselves, the way she said, "I'm Claire Hughes, Director of Guest Experience," without any of the instinctive minimizing she had carried for 3 years. At 8:30, she was on the mezzanine overseeing the private dining service when she became aware that Gabriel had arrived. She hadn't heard him come in. He moved through spaces the way he always moved through them, without announcing himself. But she felt the shift in the room's atmosphere the way she always had, and she looked over the mezzanine railing, and there he was in the lobby below, in a dark suit, looking up at her. He had been cleared by his doctor that morning. He had texted her that fact with the same economy he texted everything. She had responded, "Good. Don't be late tonight." He was not late. She watched him speak to Jonathan Park at the front desk, a brief exchange, functional, and then he looked up at the mezzanine again. She held the look from above. He had asked her 3 days ago, in a car on the way to a meeting she had requested with the Beaumont's independent accounting firm, what she wanted. Not in the work sense, in the other sense. She had told him she didn't answer questions like that in cars. He had said when, then. She had said after the opening. It was after the opening. She went back to work. She had an event to run. The last guest left at 11:15. The staff worked the breakdown with the quiet efficiency of people who had been trained well and knew it. Clara walked the lobby one final time, the walkthrough she had done after every event for 3 years, the check that everything was in order and nothing had been left behind. The lobby was perfect. Not perfect in the way of things that had never been touched, but perfect in the way of things that had been used well, lived in for a first time, marked gently by the first evening of what it was going to be. She stood at the center of the marble floor and looked up at the chandeliers, restored, rewired, throwing the amber light she had specified across the high ceiling. And she thought about the woman who had stood in the Plaza Hotel service corridor in October and pressed her hand against a plaster wall and breathed through the third exhale that shook. She had been that woman. She was still that woman in the ways that counted. She had not become someone else. She had become more completely herself, which was the only transformation that was worth anything. Gabriel came to stand beside her. She had heard him cross the lobby. She had not turned around. "The mezzanine service ran clean," she said. "I know, I watched." The front desk check-in timing was 4 seconds over target on average. "I'm going to adjust the protocol." "All right. The coat check flow needs a reconfiguration. The sight line from the entrance creates a bottleneck if more than 4 guests arrive simultaneously." "Clara." "I know. she said. She turned to look at him. He was close, the way he had been on the dock before the van came around the corner, close in the way that had stopped being accidental some time ago, that she suspected had stopped being accidental before she had words for it. "The Falcones," she said. Dominic accepted the terms yesterday. His attorneys called it noon. His voice was even. The New Jersey port operations, the distribution network, the hospitality shells, all of it goes to the negotiating table with the FBI. He walks with reduced exposure and no New York territory. He leaves. He leaves, she breathed. The lobby was quiet around them. The cleaning crew was on the mezzanine, the sounds of it distant, and down here it was just the amber light and the marble floor and the building she had spent 3 months making into something real. "Marcus," she said, "cooperating with the federal investigation. He gives them the Falcone contact, the payments, the communications. He stays out of a cell." A pause. "He called me this morning." "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry. He said you were right about the vendor contracts." Something in Gabriel's expression, not quite a smile, but what preceded one in a face that rarely let them through. "In that order." She almost smiled herself. Almost. "I'm going to need to hire a new operations director." "Yes." "Someone with no existing relationships." "Jonathan Park has expressed interest." She considered that. "He left me a note on his desk when I walked to the dock." She looked at the floor. "He called your number and then he left the building layout on the front seat of your car on the way to the hospital." "He's thorough." "He'll do," she said. They stood in the lobby of the Beaumont Hotel on a January night after the first evening it had ever been what it was intended to be, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that had been built over months of shared space and real difficulty, and it held. "You said after the opening," Gabriel said. "I did." "It's after the opening." She looked at him. She thought about the Plaza Library and the Tribeca warehouse and the car on Park Avenue and the loading dock and the hospital waiting room. She thought about 7 months of him watching her work before she had known he was there. She thought about his hand against her cheek in the corridor at 4 a.m. She thought about what she had told him in the hospital. "I need to be told things, not the managed version." "I want a real thing," she said. "Not a managed one. Not the version where you decide what I can handle." "I know." "And I am going to be very difficult to manage," she said, in case that wasn't clear. "It was clear from approximately the second week of November," he said, "when you restructured the vendor contracts and didn't tell me you were doing it until they were done." "I had approval authority." "You did." "And I was right." "You were right," he said. Not magnanimous, factual, the way he said everything true. She looked at him, at the cut above his eyebrow healed now to a thin line that would probably remain. At the steadiness of him, the containment and the force underneath it, the man who had caught her before she hit the floor in October and had been, in one way or another, doing that ever since. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She turned back to the lobby, the marble floor, the sconces, the front desk that was going to need a minor adjustment to the check-in protocol, and the coat check that was going to need a reconfigured sightline, and the mezzanine above them that had run its first dinner service 4 hours ago and had run it clean. Gabriel stood beside her and they looked at the hotel together, and neither of them said anything for a while, because the things that needed to be said had been said, and the things that needed to be done had been done. And what was left was this: a building that worked, a night that had mattered, and 2 people standing on a marble floor in the particular quiet that followed a storm when you had come through it, and the sky was clear and everything in front of you was simply, finally, what it was going to be. Clara Hughes had walked into the Plaza Hotel in October as a woman the room looked through. She was walking out of the Beaumont Hotel in January as a woman the room was built around. The difference was not what anyone had given her. The difference was what she had refused to give up.